Who doesn't love a button down or a shirt with a yoke? And they are still prone to some fit issues, just like any garment with a set-in sleeve. So on this one right here, I'm going to show you how to combat this little armhole gape. So maybe you've decided to make a sample and you tried it on and you didn't put the sleeve on and you're like, wait, what's this? This isn't even what I was looking for. Well, I'm going to show you how to fix this. It's a very simple fix. I'm also going to show you how to fix flat or rounded high back adjustments here that are kind of in this area, and I'll show you a sample in just a second. I'm also going to show you how to do a lower rounded back. Maybe you need a little bit more space right here. There's a few different ways we can combat this. All the while, we're going to keep the pattern on the fold and we're not going to affect anything, and it'll really fit you nicely. It's really worth getting these little details fitting good, since you'll probably make a lot of these if you get the pattern right. All right, so with this little armhole gape issue, if you're seeing this, maybe you have the sleeve on, maybe you don't, you just want to pinch that amount, and we're going to take it out right along this seam up here. We're just going to slide it up in there. So make sure that you pinch the amount that you want to get rid of. And if your armhole's doing this, coming onto the body, you'd want to trim that away too. That's not really the fitting issue I thought this was going to have here. But I'll show you, if you do feel like your arm is being pushed around by the back of your shirt, you can just carve it out like this, just like that. And we can get that back on track. And I'll also give you some tips on how to deal with the sleeve that goes to that. All right, so this is a gaping armhole plus this little bonus scoop here. Okay, for this right here, this is a pattern that just has too much rounded shape for the person wearing it. They need a flatter pattern here. So I'm going to show you how to flatten this out here a little bit and make it hug the body a little closer than this little gapping thing we're getting here. You're going to probably feel like it's just not very comfortable across this upper high area of the back or the lower neck. We're going to decrease this amount right here and get rid of that bit that's sitting there. You can see, like, it looked like we needed to take it in here, but honestly that still keeps the neck too high. But if we maybe pinch it out going across like this, you can see it kind of brings the neck down in a nicer space, flattens it out for this wearer, and we'll get rid of that little bit there. And we're going to do this right up here at the high neck there. It's just really hard to pinch. So maybe pinch out what you think you might need. And maybe we can kind of get this to sit a little better, just to kind of interview the amount that we're talking about here. These adjustments are sometimes really hard to detect. So don't be too hard on yourself if you're like, I don't know what I need. I don't know if it needs to be flatter or rounder. You might just try them and then try it on and see what works best for you. It may seem like a lot of samples and stuff, but I bet once you figure out, and you'll start seeing a trend in a lot of your garments, and you can kind of head it off at the pass and do these changes before you even cut out your fit sample, and then see if it's going to work. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Once we change it, it'll fit better. It'll relax a little bit through here, and we'll probably get it to hang nicer rather than me hiking it up at this weird little spot just in the center. So we'll make it a little more subtle and probably a little less than that. This is a 50% size dress form, so something more like that. And since we'll be overlapping it kind of all through here, it'll pull all of this down and it'll look a little nicer. All right, for the rounded back, this is most likely why you're here if you're looking for some adjustments in this area. For a flatter back, most people aren't uncomfortable with that, so they don't notice it. But with a person who needs more shaping in here or a rounded back adjustment, they're not comfortable. They're feeling a little bit like fidgety in their garment, and they're just feeling a little bit like it's pulling the front to the back, and they're not understanding why the collar stand is riding up on their neck, and they just need a little bit more space in here and more shaping through here. So we're going to do this adjustment really high on the neck, but if you wanted to try and figure out how much you need, we're going to make a slice like right here, and we're going to go just straight over to the shoulder and make a hinge right there. And we would cut that apart, and I'll cut this straight down my center back just so we can see it on one side. All right, and now we can raise this up. Gives ourselves a little wedge there. Maybe reorient our shoulder a little bit to hang a little nicer. I still have yet to remove this armhole gape on this pattern piece, but it's there. All right, so here we have this little wedge. And so you can see this already looks a lot nicer right through here. This little armhole gape, very easy to get rid of. It's in the beginning of the video. So here you have it. And we'll record this amount and then we'll add it to the pattern. And we're gonna keep the yoke on the fold. All right, so this is a rounded lower back. So basically it's just too tight right across here. And it wants to spread apart and kind of relax. And what you might find is that the shirt kind of swings off of the shoulder blades here. This might be a little bit harder to detect as well, but if you're definitely seeing this, like this one here is less of an armhole gape and more that it's just pulling down at the center here. The way you can test if this is going to work for you and see if it's going to release this is cut straight across here and let this relax and see if that kind of helps the issue. You can tape some fabric back there or paper or something like that. All right, you can see that that really helped relax this here. It brought the shirt a little bit more in line with the body as well. If we could add this little wedge here, it would be probably a lot more comfortable. So I'm gonna show you how to do this and keep your yoke on the fold. I'm also going to show you how to do this for if you need it to be flatter. And then if you wanted to test that out, you can just pinch the fabric and see if that kind of picks it up and puts the shirt closer. All right, so I'm going to show you how to adjust this for a pattern and keep the yoke on the fold. All right, for this lower flat adjustment, this is another one where you probably won't notice it very often, but the back neck might be loose, and it also might be that the collar stands away from your body or your neck here. It makes it so that this just sits further away. So this is probably harder to detect because it's behind you, maybe your hair covers it up. So to flatten this area here, we would pinch it out going across. And we're gonna do this sort of low right here and pull it down, but it's a little hard to grab because of the seam allowances in the way. And we're gonna do this at the seam right here. So it is going to be pretty low, but it's going to definitely make this sit a little better. You can already see how much nicer that is, getting rid of all that slack. That'll go away. It's really just because we're only pulling it in one spot. We're not evenly distributing it, because once we pull it like this, we're gonna flatten it out all the way across, just like that. Fabric's kind of amazing. When you start playing around with it, you can see what it does when you're pulling and pinching it and pulling it. So let's mark that amount, and we're gonna do this right in the seam, just like we're gonna do with the rounded back. All right, let's make some adjustments on our yoke pattern here. So for this first one, we're gonna be dealing with the armhole gape that we had there. So we're just gonna pinch it out, and we're gonna trim it off this top edge of our lower back here. And we're gonna not change the length of this seam so it still sews to the yoke. So we're gonna measure the amount that we wanna get rid of, and we're gonna trim it away here. Now, when you're measuring something like this that you're gonna get rid of, we're not concerned really about this seam allowance line. We're concerned about this line right here, right? So we are traveling along that line. So if we're removing vertically, we're going to draw our line this way. So just because there's seam allowance along this edge here, it doesn't mean that we need to work inside here to remove the amount we want, because we're going to be working on the seam line and shortening it. So we're going to take that amount and draw our hatch mark along this line. That's right there, and it looks like I'm just trimming off my seam allowance, but we're going to angle it down, blending it in just like this. And now what we need to do is ensure that we have a nice smooth transition for our yoke and that we haven't changed the length of it. Now remember, this has a pleat in it, so make sure you take into account whatever your pleats are if you have more than one or whatever. Usually I just measure from the notch out and I just exclude the pleat and I don't have to worry about it. So now let's draw in our seam allowance here so we can see where we're working here. And this is the line we're working on right here. And now we can trim off this excess here. We've maintained a center back right angle here. Now we just need to worry about our junctures here. So if I overlap this on the seam line here, like this and like this, I can tell I have a pretty good transition here along the armhole. And now let's just make sure that we can sew this together. And what I'll do is I'll just lay it on here and pretend like I'm sewing it and walk it along the seam line edge there. And I also like to look at it both sides because if it's hanging off, you can't tell. So we're looking at it, making sure it's lining up along the seam line where you would actually sew. Don't line up the raw edges or the cut edges. You want to line it up along the seam line. The other way you can do it is just measuring that amount and double checking. All right, so the other thing that we're going to address on this particular pattern, just as a bonus, is this little scoop here. So let's try and transfer this scoop, and all right, and so let's blend this line right here, just like this. It's more of like a oval shape there. And now we'll trim it off. It's definitely a rough adjustment. And again, I would have to make sure that my yoke sews, that I have a nice smooth transition, that I haven't changed any of my seam allowances. But what I have changed in this adjustment, with both these adjustments, is the length of my armhole. I haven't changed the yoke, but I have changed this lower length here. Now, if I had only trimmed off the top, I would have changed the length by that amount. And the way I would adjust that is by slicing into my sleeve about where that adjustment took place, which is about right here. You know, if I'm looking at where that line would hit the armhole. Now, I'm going to continue as if I had only done this, since that's what this tutorial is mainly focused on. But I'm just going to add that if I had adjusted my armhole scoop like this, that would lengthen the armhole and it might counteract the amount that I trimmed up here. So you can just measure this amount and see if it's going to match. Now remember, if you're dealing with a set-in sleeve, your set-in sleeve may be larger than the armhole it sews to. So what I like to focus on is changing the sleeve the amount I changed the pattern. Anytime you're working with sleeve, it's good to measure your sleeve before and then measure your armhole before, make your changes, and then measure them after so that you maintain the exact same amount that the sleeve is larger than the armhole. All right, so now let's say we were only adjusting that little armhole gape there. There's a few ways we can do this. I'm gonna slice down and I'm just gonna overlap that amount. So that amount that I took off of the lower back here by dropping it, and the amount that I measured right here along that seam line, remember I don't have any seam allowance on my armhole. So we're gonna measure that on this seam line again. We're always working on the seam line. So let's put that little mark there. And now we can overlap it just like this. And we're looking at our cut line touching there. What we're trying to do is maintain our underarm seams sewing to one another like this, so that we're not changing any of that and we don't have to adjust that because that's a little trickier. Now, this means that now your sleeve is not symmetrical if you fold it in half, but that's okay. We aren't symmetrical, and that's okay. If you're drafting a sleeve from scratch, the sleeve needs to be symmetrical. But after that, once you start fitting it custom, it's okay if it kind of gets a little bit more skewed. Now we just need to blend in this amount here. And I sometimes will split the difference to get rid of this jog. Most of the time though, I go with the wider line. I don't usually need the cap to get narrower, but sometimes you do. If you're trying to get the cap narrower, then maybe go with the narrower line. And now you can trim your paper, make sure you secure. Look at that little tiny sliver. That's definitely going to go somewhere if I don't secure it. And now your sleeve should sew to the armhole and you won't have any armhole gape. All right, let's deal with this high flat and high round adjustment. So on this one here, we're flattening it, so we're getting rid of the fabric there. And on this one, we're going to be lifting it up. And we want our yoke to stay on the fold, right? So we're gonna do the exact same thing we do on other set-in sleeves, and we're going to adjust it right here at the neck seam going toward the shoulder. So we're gonna draw a line straight from center back to the shoulder. It may land on the armhole. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even have to be perpendicular. You just need a line straight back from center back. It's just that it's really important that you measure the correct amount on that center back line. All right, and we're going to create a hinge right here. So we're going to slice here up to the seam line and then up to the seam line on the other side of it. Now, if we were making a rounded back, we're going to be raising it up. So we would tape the paper here on the lower edge first, the lower slice first. We're going to square up our center back line. And then we're going to add that amount that we decided that we needed right there at the back neck. And all the same rules apply like we do on the set-in armhole or any of the others. You don't really want to do more than like 5/8 of an inch max. All right, and then we're going to lower this section to that hatch mark just like this. So you want to make sure you have a right angle right here. And then you're going to need to straighten your shoulder here. And remember, we always work on the seam line, so we're going to connect the dots, the neck to the armhole right along the shoulder there. And then add back our seam allowance just like that. And then we haven't changed the length of this neck seam. We haven't changed our shoulder or our armhole edge. And we've left this on a center back fold. You don't have to worry about facing since this is a yoke, and all of your collar pieces should sew just fine. All right, and so now if we wanted to flatten this out, we're doing the same thing. We're squaring a line across from center back to either the shoulder or the armhole. We're going to make a hinge up to this point, just like this. And this time we're going to go lower. So we're going to draw our amount along the center back line here below the cut line, the amount we want to get rid of. And then we're going to drop this upper portion down to that hatch mark. Make sure your pieces are flat. Secure that, and then again, you want to make sure that you have a right angle at your neck here. Trust me, it's worth checking. And then smooth it out. If not, you don't really want to add seam allowance or anything like that. You just want to make sure you have your right angle because you have your seam line there. That is the true seam. There we go. Oh, it already fell off. All right, and we would need to straighten our shoulder line here. And since we flattened it, we need to draw it in on this side, and then we draw back our seam allowance here, and then we need to trim off this edge. It's very small. I'm using a Sharpie, which is not the most accurate way to do pattern drafting. I just want the lines to be visible. So if you were doing a pencil, you probably would definitely see the amount that I trimmed off there. All right, and so now this would keep your yoke on the fold. None of your seams have changed, and you've either given yourself more space or flattened it out. All right, so let's add or flatten this lower back area here. We're gonna focus on the seam here of the yoke. Now, the only thing I don't really like about this adjustment is that it's going to make your yoke have a rounded line. Personally, I think the drawback of this adjustment is that it takes your yoke seam and your lower back seam off of a straight line. It's not as critical for that armhole gape by rounding it here because we're out here and this gets kind of tucked in the crease of your arm. But out here in the middle of your garment, maybe you've worked on some plaid matching or stripes or things like that. When you end up changing this line to a rounded line, it can upset some of that matching. If you can put your yoke on the bias and then maybe counteract some of that visually, but if you can make any kind of rounded or flat adjustments up here, it might be better for any pattern matching you have going on. So I'm going to show you how to do this anyway because it might be really helpful. I think a lot of people can benefit from this adjustment. So on this one here, we're going to be pinching it out in sort of a fisheye wedge right here. And we're going to do it on the seam. I pinched it out in the yoke, but we're going to do it on the seam. And then you can see that fisheye on this piece right here. We're going to add it on this one. So let's start with the adding. Now on pattern pieces like this, I really like working on a full pattern piece. I think it's a little easier to get a nice transition. So let's add paper to both. We're going to do the rounded one first. And we're going to take this amount right here, divide it in half, and we're going to add half of it to the top and half of it to the bottom. So we're going to square up our center back line, draw that half amount along it as a hatch mark, and then we'll do the same thing on the yoke, but go the other direction. And now all we need to do is round this line out to the armhole. Now you want the rounding to end before your seam right here, this seam right here, because this is the end of your pattern. Not here, here. So when we round this out, you can use your ruler for a little bit of the way. I like to eyeball these really subtle ones, and sometimes even scissors are easier, because look at that, I already got kind of a mound back there. We don't really need it over here, we need it over here anyway, so we're gonna try and flatten that out. And same with this one. Sometimes I can even do better going the other direction, like that. Now, these two need to sew together, so you could even cut one of these, trace your shape onto the other one, and then you'll have the exact same replica of your line, just like this. We line it up, remember, to the pleat, and then line up your seam line right here and right here, like that and like that. And then we can trim this long edge. We have to have a right angle at center back on both the yoke and on the lower back. So you need that right angle right here and right here. And then there we go. We have that little bit of rounded, so it's kind of like a reverse dart. We kind of gave the wearer a little bit more space right there. And you can still sew your pleats, it'll all be fine. None of your other seams have changed, only the ones that we did the change to. All right, so now let's flatten this lower back area here across the yoke seam. So we're gonna do the exact same thing, but we're gonna do it kind of in reverse. So we're going to measure down on this piece the amount that we want to remove along the center back here. And then we're gonna go up along the yoke, right there. And now this time we're sort of scooping it out. So you wanna go up to where the seam is, like this. Because we're sort of making a dart. If we looked at it like this, we're trimming away. Remember, we want this to end right here at that seam line right here. It probably looks a little confusing with my seam allowance still drawn in there. So let's draw in our new seam line here, like that. And make sure you transfer any notches. And same here, like that. All right, now we're gonna trim this off and we're scooping it away, just like that. And so now when we look at our yoke, you can see there's a little bit of a gap here. And we've created a nice little fisheye of a space that will fit the wearer a lot nicer. And we haven't affected any of our seams. Make sure, if you need to, make sure you have your right angle right here, and you should be good to go. All right, so let's compare our pattern pieces. So for our armhole gape here, we removed a little of our armhole here, scooping, and we also lowered that portion right there at the top. Get rid of that little bit of a wing in the armhole. And as far as our high back flattening and rounding here, this was the one we flattened. So let's lay it on top. And you can tell we really significantly brought this down and kind of scrunched out that fabric there. And on the rounding, we did the opposite. We lifted it up. And gave the wearer more space. And as far as our low back, here is our flattened low back here, and we've scooped it away right here at the lower back and right here at the yoke. Gave ourselves a nice little fisheye wedge there. And for the rounded, it's pretty obvious because we can still see that little colored piece of paper on both of these, the exact amount that we added there. All right. Good luck making your yokes, and I hope they fit really good. I hope you're enjoying my Fitopedia fitting series, and if you want to get more fitting tutorials, just check the description. There's going to be links to more. And if you would like a printed version of these mini tutorials, just check the description or look under the video, and eventually you'll be able to make your own little Fitopedia booklet. And it'll be a really great, quick, easy reference to how to diagnose and fit the issue that you're working on. So I hope you're getting a lot out of the series. Please let me know, like, comment, and subscribe, and follow along for more. Thanks for watching.